So hello everyone, this is Smitesh Bakrania. As you saw in the abstract, I want to talk about an app and how to get your presentations more engaging, how to get your classes more involved. And so let me get you introduced to the concept, at least, with this slide. Now, we all want our students to be engaged, our students to participate constantly in a class, but a scene like this would be devastating for any good teacher, right? We've had those days when students are not engaged, where they're not participating, and what do? We ask them questions so that they can answer them, maybe get them involved, and maybe get a sense of, are they just sleeping or completely not paying attention, right? Well, there's a problem with this. What we do is we typically ask a question to the whole class, right, an open question, and then people who raise their hands, right, get picked. Well, if we think about it, only the people who know the answer would actually end up raising their hands, right? And so we get a sense that when they answer, we feel like, oh, the class is understanding exactly what I'm saying, except only few of them understand what's going on. And so to counter that, or to combat that, we basically need to randomize, right? So we randomize those people, basically the whole class, so that we can sort of randomly pick people to ask questions. Now, traditionally what we can do is we can have flashcards or little cards with their names on it, and then we shuffle them, right? And then we can pick one at a time and ask them questions. Well, now that's a perfectly fine strategy, except you have to carry those cards around. And I started thinking, why not use something that is already in our pocket, right? Why not use a smartphone to do exactly that? And so that's what this idea is about, right? We have a Pick Me app that was developed for the iPhone. It was developed on iOS Xcode environment. It was designed for this specific purpose, and it's available on the App Store for free as a download. Okay, so that's the general idea. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is how to use this app to get your students to participate, how the app works, and specifically how does it impact the classroom, and how does it impact the instructor, right? So again, I'm Smitesh Bakrania. I'm an associate professor at Mechanical Engineering Department at Rowan University. This is in southern New Jersey. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on this app that I developed. Okay? So let me introduce you to the app. This is what the app greets you with. It's an opening screen which tells you, hey, you're teaching these classes which you entered, right? And you can specify the names of the classes that you're in. And as soon as you get in, it's basically a visual roster of your class, meaning you have faces of students on there, right, and their names right next to them. So that's very useful. But I think it's best to sort of display and get a feel for the app when I show you how it works. So here's a little video. So I'm going to be talking over the video. The app resides on your iPhone. Obviously, you click on it. And again, the first thing you see is the list of classes. You can specify a specific class. Just type in the name of the class, whatever you're happy with. Done. You create a class list. You can delete that class later on if you don't like the name, or you can even change the name of the class. So some basic functionality. And as soon as you get into one class, you get a list of your students. You can list them by last name, first name, or randomize. Or the best part when you click or shake on a student, it randomly picks a student. So this is great. This is what I do is I'm in my class. I can just randomly pick student by shaking my phone, and I can go through, rate their response immediately right there, meaning how well are they doing immediately with those 4-star ratings. The stats are at the bottom of that student listing. You can add images and information about that student. You can also email that student specifically directly from the app because you've already entered the email and contact information. And you saw that you could flip through students as well. You don't have to shake it, but it's just that, you know, at the end of the day, students love the shake gesture. All right, this is an important one. You can also import using a CSV file on Dropbox. So that's pretty convenient. If you don't want to enter a list of 100 students, you can just simply use Dropbox. That's the class stats. So you can actually export your statistics of ratings of their questions directly and then import into Excel if you want for grading purposes. So now you have a quantifiable way of measuring student participation. Here's another feature where you can group students into whatever size you want. It randomly assigns students to teams. So this was a group of 2 students each. There was an odd number, so it added to the first group. So fairly convenient, lots of little features. And you can see that, you can imagine how one can use this. And as I said, the students absolutely love the fact every time I take my phone out and I shake and pick a student, they actually have a smile on their face rather than a terrified look of, oh no, I'm going to get picked for a question. So I think it's a fun sort of a game that we play, and it's entertaining for the students as long as it's not too challenging for them. And that's what I want to talk about sort of later on, is how do you actually use this in a class so that it doesn't become this, I'll get you next time game. Okay? And this is a good sort of time to even acknowledge what the development took. What I call in the industry am a UX designer or user interface designer. I basically lay out the apps, lay out the graphics, supply the graphics, and create an environment on a piece of paper and then hand it over to my students. And these are undergraduate mechanical or sophomore electrical engineers working on coding the app. I don't actually write any code. I basically field test it. I design the app. I come up with the concept. And there are a whole bunch of apps that I'm working on or I've published already that are available on the App Store. Again, most of the coding is done by students. I'm the one who comes up with the idea and the interface. Okay, so let's move into, does it impact your classroom? Does it actually improve? Okay, now you probably know that the reason why I'm presenting is it probably does improve class participation. So the impact in classroom is positive to a point that I was very surprised. Okay, so that's the main conclusion, right? Now, if I were to come to you and say, I have this idea of an app that I'm going to randomly call people to ask questions, you might think it's a good idea, but if you ask students, they probably think it's a terrible idea because they're just terrified at the fact that they're going to be randomly called and put on spot. So what we call this is cold calling, and if you read in research literature about pedagogy, that's one thing you should avoid because it puts people on spot, it raises their anxiety, it creates animosity that, you picked me for a very difficult question, I embarrassed myself in front of my colleagues. Now, so the conclusion that I made earlier basically refutes that, right? It says students love it. So what gives? And here's my sort of take-home message because I wanted to present it now so that it doesn't get lost. Cold calling is this random calling and asking questions and putting them on the spot only works if the students know the questions beforehand. Meaning, if you give them a set of questions, 10 or 5 or 6 questions, and say, hey, next class I'm going to be asking you answers to these questions, but I'm going to use PickMe to randomly pick people. Okay, so in this set of studies, keep this in mind that I always presented the questions beforehand, right? And that's why they love this idea that, look, we're working hard, we answer the question, and yes, we get gratified at the end that we get called. We just simply read off our answers that we already have in front of us. Okay, so that's the general idea. Now, before we get into the student feedback, I want to give you a user feedback, specifically my feedback on what I felt using this app, right? So first I'm going to focus on usability. Now, since the pilot study that I'm going to be focusing on, I've been teaching, constantly since the development of the app. And my typical classes are about 30 to 40 students, and these are engineering courses. And so this particular class is a thermal fluids class where we have 40 students, and we have 7 weeks to teach the content. Number one, it's absolutely easy to remember every student's name using PickMe, because again, you have a photo right next to their name. And since you're randomly calling, you're actually learning their names very, very quickly. So learning names becomes a breeze, right? So that's a great tool that I never realized it would work like that. Secondly, when I teach, I always have a portion of the grade that is dedicated to class participation, because I want classes to be interacting, right? So students participate, students asking questions, and I always have that grade as 5% or 10% of their total grade. Now, the problem with that idea is that it's very subjective, because it typically depends on my ability to remember if a student has participated or not. Well, with PickMe, I have a quantifiable number now, right? It's actually a number that says, hey, this person was called upon 13 times, they answered it well, half of the time, or they got an average of 3.76 stars. That's a number that I can put, and that's more real, right? So that was very useful. And more importantly, it's always there in my pocket. It's not something that I forgot a stack of my students' list so that I can randomly check in my office so I can't use it. It's always in my pocket. It's a phone. We always keep it with us. Notice I don't even wear a watch, because that's also my watch, so I can't go away from my random list of students, right? So it's very, very convenient to have it with me. Okay. Let's talk about the impact in classroom. That was usability, right? And so again, this is my perspective. This is not the students. As an impact, I felt that it motivated the students to do the ungraded assignment. Remember, I said, here are the 5 questions, here are the 6 questions. Go home, answer them, and come back, and I'll randomly pick. It turns out every student did the problems because they kind of, well, for the lack of better word, feared that they will get selected, right? That means they came to class prepared for that class. And I would typically ask them questions that would prompt a discussion, that would prompt an introduction to the next topic. So it worked really well. The students walked in ready to learn. Secondly, it provided a balanced feedback. Now, that was part of the design of the app. It was supposed to give me a good, decent idea of how the class was doing by randomly picking, by randomly seeing how they were responding to these questions. I could focus on things where I felt like, well, that answer was weak, and is this true for everyone else? And I would get a better sense of how the class was doing, rather than saying, hey, the 2 kids in the front who always raise their hands, what do you think about the problem? Clearly, they always have an idea. Third, it improved student engagement. It obviously forces them to engage, but it does get them involved more, right? It gets them comfortable. And that leads to number 4, which is overall participation increased whether I was using the app or not, because again, they got comfortable with this idea that, look, I'm going to get picked anyways, so let me just raise my hand, or let me just answer, or let me participate in this conversation. they got comfortable at speaking in class. And many of us, even I, when I was a student, I felt sort of reserved and feared that I would say something stupid or didn't make sense. But in the end, when you hear everyone's answers, like, oh yeah, they're all at the same level. I mean, I shouldn't be afraid of expressing my opinion. And so that was very revealing when I thought of it that way. Okay, so let's get to the pilot study. Now, let me preface this by saying this, that I think the app is great. I think because I developed it and I used it, it works great. The most important question is, what do the students think of it? And this pilot study was designed to sort of get that information out of those students, right? And so I took 2 classes that I was teaching that term. The first class was Freshman Engineering Clinic. It is the first class that any engineer takes. We teach them basic skills. And the second class was Introduction to Nanotechnology, which was the last, meaning the seniors take this class. And what you see is that there's a very different set of students in both classes. Maybe the freshman class are more timid, they're not comfortable at speaking. Maybe the Introduction to Nanotechnology seniors are very, very comfortable. So I wanted to get a sense of a range of students included in this study. And so what I did was, what I would typically do is assign sort of assignments with questions. Now these questions are not graded, so I would supply them in the class before, a list of questions. Hey, go ahead and answer these 5 questions and come back to the next class prepared. And so then they would come back, and next class I would randomly pick students, right, using Pick Me. And I would pick those students and rate their responses for later. Now, I did this multiple times over a whole bunch of lectures with these designed questions and a follow-up Pick Me randomized selection. And then there were 2 types of feedback that I got. There was an open feedback. Now, this is I do every single class. Every single class after 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what class it is, after I've had a quiz, after they've completed their homework, I'll always ask them, what are the things that are working and what are the things that are not working? Remember, this is nothing to do with Pick Me. This is just what I do with every class, so that I get some feedback on how I can change or how I don't need to change, or what are the things that they love. Okay? And I think this is a really important thing that even if you don't use Pick Me, you should be doing in a class, because again, feedback is important, and also students feel like their voices are heard. Okay, so that was open feedback. The last feedback, which was very, very pertinent to Pick Me, was the Pick Me feedback, meaning I had specific questions regarding Pick Me, right? I was asking about what they thought of Pick Me and all sorts of related questions. Okay, now that was right at the end of the term, meaning the whole term went by me using Pick Me on and off, and at the end I said, so what do you think about this idea? Okay, so that's the setup. Let's get to the open feedback. So let me repeat what open feedback is. Open feedback is 2 to 3 weeks after the class has started. I've had some homework, I've had some lectures, maybe a quiz, and I ask, hey, so what do you think of the class? Is it, what are the things that are working versus what are the things that are not working? And they sort of generally give me a list, and I force everyone to answer this. Every student has to answer. But I'm not asking anything about Pick Me. Now, within this feedback, if I saw any negative comment that was, hey, Pick Me is a terrible idea, I hate it, it puts me on the spot, that would be a red flag. It turns out there were zero negative feedback on the use of Pick Me. Okay? In fact, some people specifically stated, I like that Pick Me thing that you do, right? meaning this was unsolicited feedback from a student. And so I'd like to share at least two of them, maybe three of them here. Okay, so the comments related to PICME are in bold, so I'll just read those. The first one is also, the use of PICME app gives a fair chance for students to obtain their participation grades, which is nice, right? Because if there's a participation grade and some people are very, very aggressive at raising their hands, the people who are not so aggressive don't get a chance. So this student is saying, well, it gave me a chance to speak up when I typically don't. And now I can get that participation grade because I did well at my answers. So that was something that I hadn't thought of on what the students are experiencing in my class, right? Because there's always that overzealous person who is raising their hands all the time. And it's very, very difficult to ignore them, right? And it almost feels bad to say, hey, can you let someone else answer, right? The second feedback is the randomized student selection with iPhone is good. So that's, again, saying, hey, PICME app is good. And finally, so far I like the use of PICME app as it forces each of the class members to pay attention. Again, this goes back to the engagement side of things, right? Because they're always engaged. They feel like, look, I got to be listening to this thing because I might get picked, and I don't want to, embarrass myself. And in doing so, whether they get picked or not, they're engaged. They're listening to you, and in fact, that's exactly what we want. Over time, they obviously will build a habit of it, but this forcing sometimes is helpful. Okay, so let's get back to the end of the term PICME feedback. At the end of the term, I asked every student to fill out a survey, and the survey was specifically for PICME. And I asked them 3 multiple choice questions and an open-ended comment section, which is just say, hey, what do you think of PICME? Okay, so the first question was, how would you rate your attitude towards PICME app for randomly selecting students? And I wanted to make it really, really broad so that people have a feeling of, what do I think about this thing? Is it good? Is it bad? And you can see that majority of the class, both the class 1 is freshman, class 2 is nanotechnology. Both of them thought, yeah, it was great. Yes, there's a couple students who thought, somewhat, it didn't like it. So I think generally that's a positive response. Okay, so let's go to the second question. Second question was, do you think PICME helps students stay engaged in class? This sounds like an overwhelming yes, right? It says absolutely for majority of the class, and then some say somewhat. Well, that's better than nothing, right? That's better than does not, okay? So clearly students think that it was helping them stay engaged, it got them involved. So was it a bad thing or a good thing, right? That's the question. And that's where we go to number 3. Do you think it is fair to randomly select students to respond? And before I get to the answer, which you can clearly see, I want to say this. Remember the premise that we started with. Cold calling has been shown via research that it's a bad idea because it raises students' anxiety. This chart, the set of charts, are saying, no, that's not the case, overwhelmingly. And that's a resounding yes, at least on the class 2, right? That says, no, it was actually fair. It was fine. And remember what I said to begin with. It's fine because they already know the questions ahead of time. It doesn't sound like an unfair thing to say, hey, figure something out right on the spot as I'm asking this question. Okay? So that's the multiple choice, very specific responses. And I want to get to the open-ended. In the open-ended PICME feedback at the end of the term, I said, well, so what do you like most or least about PICME? And this was sort of just their way of sharing anything that they disliked, something specific that they disliked, or something specific that they liked. And I think a lot of these comments are very revealing. I have all of them in a paper published at ASCE, but I picked few to give you a sense of what they liked and things that we as instructors sometimes forget. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm going to read each one. So, liked most, kept everyone attentive in class. Again, this is about engagement. Not the same person is always answering. Okay, this is a problem. Lots of students sometimes have come up to me saying, like, I like Pick Me because there's not that one person constantly getting to answer the question because they're so quick to raise their hands, which I talked about earlier. And it also creates more of a discussion, right? So sometimes I kind of go around the class and ask them to add one item at a time and make a list. And it does create that feeling of a discussion or a beginning of a discussion. And it gets everyone involved. At least, if you don't know the answer and you still got picked, well, that was by design. Okay, so that's not necessarily a con for this app. Secondly, I felt it encouraged volunteering more. That's interesting, right? A app that was forcing them to participate, now they think that it encouraged them to volunteer. That's very positive, right? It changes the perspective of that student. Since you felt as though you were going to be picked anyway, so why not volunteer, right? So the idea here is if you have the answer in front of you, you've already answered it, right? Why not raise your hand and participate rather than get picked with Pick Me? And we saw this all the time. I have seen it multiple times over the course of a few years where at the end of the class, students are volunteering to respond without even me taking my phone out. Okay, so they get comfortable with this idea of Pick Me. So, all right, so let's get to the next one. I like the idea of Pick Me. I have been in several classes in the past where participation by students was lacking. This is a student saying participation is good, right? And that's important. It's not just that we think it's bad that students don't participate. A student is saying participation is lacking and that's a bad thing. And so if the app helps this, that would make for a greater, better experience for a student, right? Again, we're creating learning environments that are more engaging that not only helps us, but it helps them as well, okay? Using the app made me feel comfortable as I realized that most of the class was in the same boat. That's another one, right? Where if everyone is talking, you get a sense of, all right, I think they understand it just as well as I do, or they don't understand it just as worse as I do. So it's one of those situations that you want to sort of understand your relative sort of level in the class, and Pick Me helps them do that. So again, this contributes to their positive attitude towards the app. Okay, so in conclusion, the survey says randomly picking student is a fair approach. Now, there's an asterisk for that because, again, it's a fair approach if you provide the questions beforehand, right? And as a result, the students had a positive attitude. And I want to sort of quickly spend some time on point number one. It's a fair approach as long as the questions are either rudimentary, meaning it doesn't require that much thinking, or you're asking questions that are just basically recalling things from last class. Sometimes I start my class and saying, all right, randomly pick students to say, what did we cover last class, right? Those are easy questions. But if you start asking questions that are very difficult, saying, hey, I'm going to randomly pick student to solve a problem on the board, now that puts people on the spot. Because again, that's very challenging. It can get sort of, it can raise the anxiety of the student, and they might say, well, I don't like this thing. They'll point to the Pick Me app. The app is not the problem, it's the questions, okay? So if you think the questions are going to be difficult that you're going to be asking in class, just give those questions ahead of time, right? Before one lecture, give them the questions like, hey, next week or next class, I'm going to be asking you about these questions. So come prepared so that I can randomly pick. Okay. Number two, the app engaged students, right? students who were involved in a class. They were they walked in, ready and prepared. They understood the problem, so they felt like they were at the same level as me as I was teaching it. Okay, and finally, there are so many overwhelming benefits of full participation that I think we discussed. Right, students feel better about their class. They have a more positive attitude towards the class. There's less likelihood of people just kind of checking off mentally and saying, "Oh, this is too boring," right? They're alert, and that does help the overall feel of the class. Okay, so we're continuing to develop PICME. At this point, we're at the third version of PICME. We're adding little features like emailing the whole class as a whole, or deleting stats. So some of these features were not there. We're continuously adding. I've got students continuing to work, and I also I've learned to use it in a very new and fun way as well. Over the course of the years, I've also started to ask questions that I have not given ahead of time. Again, I ask very rudimentary questions. And I also, to even lower the anxiety further, what I do is I just kind of play a game of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's pretty popular in India as well. I ask them, if they don't know the answer, I say, well, you can use a lifeline, you can call a friend, right? And so they basically turn to a friend and it's like, hey, Jack, you answer the question. And so that's like, again, in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you can phone a friend to help them answer a question. And it's kind of create that fun environment where it's okay if you don't know the answer, because you can get some fun out of it just by picking your friend, right? And so again, that positive feel is very important. Okay. In the pilot study, that was very structured. Over the years, as I have said, I've gone more of sort of informal approach to using PICME. I kind of just randomly use it without preparing questions. And so I wanted to give you a feedback on what they think of PICME without, again, soliciting any responses. So this was my Thermofluid Sciences course from last fall. So this is just a few months ago. And again, at Rowan University, we have a set of questions that every student taking this course answers, and it evaluates my teaching. And many times students continuously say, hey, that PICME thing was great. And so I'm going to just read. So the question was, instructor actively engage students. And one of the students said, well, the random person picker is a great tool. Keep using it and use it more. All right. And that's profound. There are students saying, hey, pick me, it's okay, right? I love this thing. Secondly, there's another student to the question of the instructor asked questions that promoted thinking. And this is, I like this response. It says, as much as I don't enjoy getting called on, right, when I don't know the answer, Dr. Bakrania did a good job getting everyone involved and everyone thinking with his PICME app. Okay, they spelt it incorrectly, but that's okay, right? Let's think about what they're saying. They hate getting called on, but it's the process by which, again, if you ask rudimentary questions, make it fun, make it involved, and I think then you can really augment that experience in a classroom using PICME. So essentially what I'm saying is PICME is not a silver bullet. It's just a tool which, if you use it effectively, then you can really promote and elevate your classroom to a level where you'd be proud of. Okay? So I'll end with PICME at that point, and I'm just going to kind of give you a glimpse of other apps that I'm working on just to get you kind of engaged in other things if you're interested. Another app is called Evaluate. And Evaluate is an iPad app that helps you grade. Now the idea is many times we're walking around with a stack of papers. I typically avoid stack of papers. I just ask my students to send me the PDFs. And so when I want to grade those PDFs, I insert them into my app, use a rubric to grade. So I basically tap through in terms of points and then hit evaluate, and it basically tallies all the points of all my students and sends it to me. So it's very convenient. I can fly without carrying a stack of papers with me as I'm grading on an airplane. So that's a great app. We're still working on adding new features. Annotation is one such feature that is currently missing. And the current sort of involvement that keeps me busy right now is an app that we haven't released yet, and it's called Andor. Andor is a very, very simple app. All it does is it reads temperatures from a thermocouple that is attached to a Bluetooth device. And so, again, I'm a thermofluids instructor and a researcher as well. I work on microcombustion. And so measuring temperature is very important to me. And measuring temperature, you can sometimes get very, very expensive equipment. Our idea is to make something compact, and again, it communicates via Bluetooth and sends the temperature data that you can plot and analyze right on your phone. Okay, so that's Andor. So I'll end with this. PicMe is available as a free download. You don't have to pay a thing. It's so popular, it has been downloaded about 13,000 times from all over the world. And when I say 13,000, might not seem that big, but it's, for me, it's huge, considering it's mostly downloaded by teachers. You know, a student or anyone else would not be interested in it. So 13K is a huge number for me. You can download it for free from the App Store for the iPhone. You can also contact me on Facebook at sb.apps. You can ask questions there. I have some resources on how to use PicMe, some more details on it. But otherwise, you can just email me directly. I'm happy to respond, and I'm also happy to see how you use it and give me some feedback on some of the features that you would like. For instance, PicMe already includes ability to do attendance, right? Take attendance. We don't take attendance, but lots of students have said, or lots of teachers have said in high school level that I would like to take attendance. So that's a feature that we added fairly recently. So with that, I'll conclude my talk, and I'm not sure if there's a Q&A session, but I'll stop at that point. So thank you.
Can this app be Android based?
Right. So that's a very common question for us. Because it's just me and my students working on it, we only have limited resources, and so we have decided to keep our sanity. We're going to stick with iOS and iPhone, because every time we update, we have lots of things to edit. But if we had another version on the Android, we would have to, you know, it would basically double our work. So we have decided to just focus on the iPhone platform.
Can you share the feedback format which you gather for students every 2 weeks?
Say that again, sorry?
Can you share the feedback format which you gather for students every 2 weeks?
Honestly, it's just 2 questions. There's no real format. I just say, what are the things that are working and what are the things that are not working? In my class, I basically talk to them about, you know, what are the things that I'm looking for? Is it my teaching? What are the, like, anything to do with homework, anything to do with quiz? So I don't have a necessarily a format or a preamble to the question. I just say, hey, answer these 2 questions, and I typically use SurveyMonkey. I started using Google Forms as well. Both those 2 approaches are fine, and they gather enough information. Sometimes I play games with them saying, you know, I would not return your homework until everyone has given me feedback. And so I keep their homework hostage. and I get 100% response rate.
Does this app provide any other feature?
So there are sort of hidden features in there. Things like multiple group list generation that again I don't have time to highlight. There are multiple ways of importing as well. But at the basic level, PickMe is supposed to give you a way to pick students. And so we continuously add little features, but the core feature doesn't change.
Thank you, Professor Smitesh. The app seems to be taking care of major challenges faced by professors and classrooms.
Yeah, and I've got a sort of similar feedback from users, so I'm looking forward to people who have heard the seminar and get me feedback when they use it in their class. So thank you.
Those are all the questions. Thank you very much, sir. I will
All
send you
right,
the
thank
record.
you. Take care, everyone.